Hello and welcome to the Allison Supply Chains podcast. This is a very special episode we put together to discuss the Verizon 2025 Data Breach Investigations Report, or the DBIR for short. We won't continue calling it that for the duration of the podcast. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, principal researcher of the Defenders Initiative, and joining me as always is Alexandre Sierra, the CTO and co-founder of Tenchi Security. How are you doing, Alexandre?
Fine, super happy to be here. Extra bonus episode, yay.
Yeah. Thank you for putting this together. I was very excited to do this. I always get excited to read this report every year. And the fact that it's part of work now, like I have to read it, is just a bonus for me. And along with us, we have Mr. Alex Pinto, one of the authors of the Verizon's annual DBIR report, and the what do you call yourself? The chief editor? You know, I know your title at Verizon is very different from that, but in the context of DBIR, who are you?
So I recently had to write that down because of some internal event we're having. So I put it as author, team lead, editorial strategist, and footnote enthusiast. I think that's the best way. That's the best way. The vast majority of the
Note,
I am the
use it.
footnote.
The note is doing a lot of work there.
It would get very weird without note on that. But absolutely, if you've ever read the DBIR, you know the footnotes are a feature, not something to be overlooked. In fact, sometimes I read a lot of these pages twice because I realize I've missed the footnotes. So before I turn to the next page, I have to look at the footnotes, find them on the page, and end up rereading some of it, which I think helps me ingest a report, right? You know, like sometimes I notice things that I don't get on the first read. So having that second read is useful. Yeah, I just want to note that this is the 18th edition. I can't believe it's been quite that long, but the 18th edition of the DBIR, so it's old enough to vote in the US, and the 15th year using the VERIS framework, which I think a lot of people have gotten a lot of mileage out of. And certainly I've used the VCDB quite a bit. Every now and then I turn to that as kind of a sanity check for things or just out of curiosity. And the sample size, as always, is amazing. We've got over 22,000 incidents and over 12,000 breaches. And you are very specific. Again, folks who have read the DBIR before know that the terminology is there's nothing casual, nothing casually thrown around. Everything is very specifically defined. So an incident and a breach can both be bad. They can both cause harm to the business. But I think the TLDR is one involves data leakage and one does not.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. And dozens, maybe hundreds of sources for the data. You know, that's another feature of this report that I don't think you really see in any other report out there. And this is data that's hard to get. We still live in a like I found out recently, there's a special class of lawyer specialization within legal just to keep breach secrets quiet, just to keep things from leaking to the public. And I guess the rationale behind that is that maybe more class action lawsuits if details get out. But we really kind of need to see some of these details to understand what's going on, to learn from these lessons, which is one of the reasons this report's so great. And as I began reading it, became immediately clear to me why Sierra was so excited about bringing you on here. Third-party risk management is kind of front and center in this report, though you also outline three other themes that are very big here, which I don't think will surprise anyone that has lived through this in 2024. But ransomware, stolen credentials, info stealers, those kind of go together, and exploits in vendor products. So with that, I also wanted to say there's some delightful Easter eggs in the report. If you read it with your eyeballs, you don't skim it too much, you don't have something summarized for it. I'm not going to spoil any of those surprises. But in addition to the footnote enthusiasm, there are also some great Easter eggs in there, and some great puns, some great jokes. So you're missing all that if you don't sit down and read this report. All right. With
May-
that,
Maybe sharing the ideas behind why focusing on those four things. Is that what jumped out in the data? Was
yeah.
there any particular event that caught your attention? Um, Not complaining, but why the focus on third parties this year, would you say?
So look, it wasn't an accident. It actually came together very early. I think this was the earliest year when we realized, okay, this is what we're going to have to write about. I think the big catalyst of us, oh yeah, there's no way around it, was around all the events around Snowflake. We're like, yeah, this is going to be incredibly big, right? This is very impactful for a lot of people. And then CrowdStrike happened, and that was just kind of I mean this. It makes me sound such a terrible person, but it was just a cherry on top, right, of what we were trying to look for. It was terrible, a lot of impact, right, and we're not here to obviously assert blame to anyone. This is not what we do on the DBIR, but it was very clear that like third-party involvement in incidents and breaches was going to be top of mind of everybody, right? So these are the kind of the three axes of what we were focusing on kind of the third party world, right? The like Adrian mentioned, the exploitation of vulnerabilities, right? In our verbiage, everybody has a definition of third party, everybody has a definition of supply chain. So vulnerabilities in third party software are very much a third party concern, right? In a way, the same way we have something like, oh, the human element, which means if your humans they had better training or you had more investment with them, maybe they would have made a different choice and the breach might not have happened. On the third party, if you had made a different choice, maybe you wouldn't be in trouble, right? Sometimes you have a no-win situation where every single vendor of a specific class of product, they all have the same problems. So there's
Yeah.
nowhere to quote unquote run, right? Some problems are way harder than others, of course, right? Some platforms, they concentrate data, so they're a much more sought after prize than others. But there is a little bit of lottery when you talk about the kind of the third party thing. I mean, if you are not trying to control the lottery yourself as well as making sure you're doing all the risk oriented stuff you should be doing with third party, right? So the vulnerabilities, a lot to talk about vulnerabilities. We can get into that if you like. Everything around the Snowflake, specifically how much it was driven by stolen credentials that were already available previously, right? It was a lot of crime of opportunity going on. So that really spurred a deep analysis on kind of the info stealer ecosystem. It's something we hadn't done before to that level. I was very proud of the research that the team did on that, right? And the third thing, we talk way less than I wanted to talk about, which is, I mean, again, not to pick on CrowdStrike at all, right? But the fact of what happened with CrowdStrike opened a lot of minds very quickly around the issues on business impact as a class of problem that could be very costly and something you're not quite tracking. And we have way more tangible examples like with better documented impact even, like the Change Healthcare one, the CDK Global, right? And so we are we're kind of circling around that in the sense that we're looking for more impact data to be able to make stronger statements and more impactful statements. But it's just like really fascinating and something that a lot of people came to talk to us about as we were, I mean, working with all the partners and everything, putting this report together. So yeah, it wasn't a hard choice, right? It is top of mind for everybody, right? And it might just be a new layer. It's not like, oh, it's going to be better next year. I think this is it. This is reality now. We're just better
Yeah.
off tracking it, just better at understanding the kind of the real sources or pinpointing the kind of the root causes a little bit better. We do that every year in security, right? Every time. Seems the problem is more complicated. Sometimes it's just the same problem. You just have a more complicated understanding, a more nuanced understanding of it, right? And so,
You guys are great at pointing that out in the report where, you might be wondering like if things really gotten worse and you point out, well, our data collection is a little bit different this year or it's a little bit better this year or
Yeah,
we're getting more
yeah.
data or better data or something like that. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's like I've been advising people in vulnerability management all week, and I try and talk them out of any kind of quantitative, like trend lines or anything like that. Because if you do a good job and you find 400 new servers that you were never scanning, it just hurts you, right? Like
Yeah,
it
you're
looks like vulnerabilities are
that
getting
thanks.
worse because your visibility is better.
Yeah, the problem. This is the tyranny of the percentage. Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, it reminds me. This is a conversation I have with like think about like highly advanced financial institution like security maturity, and um, and I met a few who actually leverage Varus like in their internal stuff, and they keep telling me. Yeah, you know what? Errors is big, right? And we keep getting hammered by the board. We keep getting hammered by leadership. Why are the errors so high? And look at this percentage. You have to bring it down. And we try to tell them, look, this is good because the other stuff, which is way worse, is way smaller. You have to think it on perspective, right? And we had a similar. I was talking to someone about this on an interview. Why are errors so much bigger on large companies? They're like, well, they're usually more mature, so they have space to make errors, right? And if you're
Yeah.
smaller, it's going to be more the run of the mill stuff, and maybe because of like lack of regulation, lack of reporting, if there is an error, you don't need to report, right? You have 5 customers, you sent the wrong email from one to another. The privacy police is not going to knock on your door, depending on where you are in the world, right? So
Where the
anyway,
Yeah.
things
customers are.
have to be
Well,
tracked.
more accurately, right? Because even if you are in the US, if you're doing business in Europe, then you right. Anyway.
Yeah, look, yeah, I realized the joke was gonna fizzle midway, but I just committed to it.
No, that's fine. It's actually something we talk about pretty regularly on the podcast, right? So, hey, this company decided to do this really ugly privacy violating thing, except for lots of countries in Europe. And I say, why is that? It's such a mystery. Why are they
It's a
asking
mystery.
for opt-in instead of the opt-out on these countries, right? Oh, right. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah,
talking
it's
about
fun.
the better data collection, I think the first thing that jumped out at me reading the report is I think you only started tracking the third party involvement in breaches last year, right? And then the percentage of I don't call it the breaches, the percentage of breaches this year was double what it was last year. So it was 30% of breaches at third party involvement this year, and then it was 15 last year. I was wondering, first of all, what is the criteria to determine that a third party was involved? Um, for example, the system of trust from MITRE, they have three separate things. The security can
Hmm.
be in the supplier, like their corporate security of the company that is providing a product or service, can be in the product, or it can be on the service they're providing. And they have very distinct three categories, right? So
Hmm.
because in the marketplace, when we talk about supply chain security, there's software supply chain security, but people like crypto became cryptocurrency. Supply chain security has become software supply chain security, but there's an actual physical supply chain as well, people. There has been for
Hmm.
hundreds of years.
Yeah.
What is the criteria you're using, and what do you attribute that jump to? Is it changes in the data you're seeing, the classification methodology, and the contributors, or do you feel like it's more an actual market trend?
So yes, it's a lot of all of the above. The so let's take it one step at a time, right? I'm actually pretty curious about this classification scheme you were talking about. It's something I definitely want to look up, right? We tried to. There were three natural things that jumped out to us as how to classify and find those. So the first one is a vulnerability was exploited. That's incredibly easy, right? That's a one-liner in our analytical pipeline, right? And someone bought a product. That product was written by a vendor. Look, this might not be true in a few years, but the vulnerability didn't write itself, right? So a lot of vibe coding coming on. Soon the vulnerabilities will be writing themselves, but not as of today. And
A preview
so
of future DBIRs right there.
yes, God, Jesus.
Vibe exploits.
Let's move on. I don't want to even spend time imagining it. And so the anyway, that's one. Two is kind of the custodian problem. So your data is in a third party. The third party gets breached, your data is up for grabs, right? So there are a lot of different signs that this has happened throughout Veris, right? So we're collecting all those different signals, right? There's a little bit of variation on how different partners code, right? There's a little bit of variation on what type of data is being stored or not. So there's a lot going on to try to pull that all in, right? And but there were the kind of the data points we need to make that determination were actually added like 3 or 4 years ago, if that makes sense, right? We're always kind of, every time we add something to Varys, beware. It's because we know it's going to happen, sadly, or it's a very clear trend. Okay, we should be collecting this because we're going to be talking about it pretty soon. And so that's one. So it's Snowflake is an example, right? Even though Snowflake wasn't really breached, right? So
Right.
it's already a contradiction to what I said, but the data was sitting there, right? And it was again a specific feature on how you did or did not configure um, your security posture there, right? That led to bad things happening, right? And the third one is the partner as a vector, right? So that's the legendary, now fabled HVAC breach in Target, right?
Yeah.
We got a
Fazio
lot of
Mechanical.
correct. I don't remember their name. You see, you remember their name.
Fazio Mechanical. Yeah. Mhm.
Yes. The stuff like we get like, oh, they got this third party so they could get into a cryptocurrency exchange. This things also happen a lot, right? Again, a lot of signals in Varus around this, right? This one, I mean, hasn't tripped yet, but we have one like physical vector partner vehicle, right? As in someone got the car from your partner and drove into your into your office. But yeah, anyway, again, Varys is very broad, often to determined a little bit. So it's those three big groups, right? And a lot of the 15% last year was was mostly vulnerabilities. This year, it's a smaller percentage of this whole that is vulnerabilities. Even though you saw vulnerability growing, of course, you're going to see third party growing, right? So we have a better representation of the partner hosting one on this data set, right? Which is definitely one you want to keep an eye out. And again, leads us to talking about like shared responsibility model, touching on it, right? We don't really like to talk about it, but um, anyway, because that's the kind of things you should be looking for. So if you're looking like, oh, big growth, right, is tracking of the custodian model, right? Your data is on a third party, and but again, I cannot. I have to attribute some of our success there for us being better and more diligent with our partners for collecting data of this specific type.
So Pinto, do you have a general sense for how much of this increase in third parties being involved in breaches is, the adversaries actually realizing that this is better bang for their buck, that they can hit more organizations through a third party, or is it just that these third parties, particularly with the bulk of this being vulnerabilities in software that we run on premises, just being low hanging fruit? Do you have a sense for if it's one or the other, or is it just a mix of all of the above?
This is also a yes, in the sense that it's very hard to ascribe intent, right?
Hmm.
We're not collecting data from threat actors yet, right? Not sure if we're gonna be able to. I'm sorry, that was a joke. Like, damn, the criminals saying it. Anyway,
Right.
never mind.
Well,
The
you joke, but that's what VX Underground does on
That's
Twitter,
fair.
right?
That is absolutely fair. That's absolutely fair. Yeah, I don't think I have the
There are
stomach for
certain
that.
breaches where 100% of what we know about it came from the threat actor on Twitter through VX Underground.
That is fair. That's very fair. But you can definitely see the whole low-hanging fruit aspect of it, right? Because again, I have to. I mean, the snowflake case is a kind of a cornerstone of the argument there that we make. But it becomes clear as you read the analysis and you read the work the IR teams did was, oh, there was this threat actor. One day they woke up and realized, huh, we have a lot of this snowflake credentials
Yeah,
lying around. Maybe we should do something about it, right? And then they've developed a tool to make it easier to brute force,
yeah.
right? And it's one of those things like, all the horses have, you already opened the gate, all the horses are out. So, it's not very, anyone else can have this realization now about any other service, right?
And if I can
Because,
quote you from the report, you write the threat actor noticed that this was something that could be breached at scale. I love your onion mug,
exactly.
by the way.
Oh yeah.
The,
I love this was a gift from Gabriel. You remember Gabriel Bassett,
Okay,
right?
yeah. Uh-huh.
nice. It's like TPCRM. It's the big thing. It's like a force multiplier. You hack one third party,
Yes.
you gain access to data from potentially hundreds, maybe even thousands, depending on who the third party is, customers, right? And in this case, again, quoting from the report, analysis of the breach found the victim count to be around 165, and
I
about
had no idea it was that
80% of
big.
them, yep, 80% of the accounts had prior credential exposure, potentially collected by info stealers, right?
Yeah, I
Which
think this
is
was all on the blog posts. Yeah. We are we yeah.
precisely,
This is known
and
information.
it's one of the things where, and allegedly at least part of that was associated with an MSP. So it's not just Snowflake as a third party SaaS provider or YaaS provider, however you want to categorize them, but also a lot of those companies, especially some large financial institutions that came to light. Um, they were hiring MSPs to operate their Snowflake infrastructure. And the thing that's super interesting here, I'm going to come back to that in a bit, is um, you talk a lot about IAM and stolen credentials, one of the big themes around the report, right? Info stealers or otherwise. And this is what happens. Like the endpoints of the people that manage Snowflake instances were compromised. In some cases, those were MSPs. And of course, every CISO is, or at least is trying to be on top of how IAM works and 2FA works on
Mhm.
their own organizations. They have SSPM tools for that. They will
Mhm.
have their IAM tooling for that. But how deeply are people looking into the IAM practices and the endpoint security practices of their third parties outside of asking a question on a questionnaire, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, right? Specifically those cases on Snowflake, it was a ninth party. It was a third party squared issue there, right? If
I'm
that
gonna steal
regard.
that.
Can we coin that? Can
I'm gonna info
A
steal
third
that from
party squared. I like it.
Yeah, so that actually motivated one of the other research that we did, which had to do with where were those credentials, right? So from the InfoStealer logs, what was the type of credential that was, sorry, what was the type of machine, right? And we found like over half of them, there were clear indications that those were also used for personal stuff,
Yeah,
right?
like a
So
Gmail account or something like that. Yeah.
correct. Most likely those were, uh, personal machines with access to credential stuff, maybe part of a BYOD program, maybe part of a BYOD program that the company didn't know about, right? Sometimes you don't get to
Yeah.
choose. So again, it underscores, again, you should preaching to the choir here, right? But if you're providing a service, you have to be responsible, especially with things like that, from your customers, right? So it just becomes, just escalates, kind of already. Again, it's already pretty bad. It's already like it's fairly easy to have those credentials available from all the info stealer activity, and then something like this happens and make it even easier, right?
And
I
there's a
hope.
long history of this as well. Like the CASB vendor Adalom that Microsoft acquired kind of made a name for themselves by discovering that threat actors were getting access to people's Salesforce instances and just downloading everything, just taking the entire Salesforce instance. And the customer didn't notice, and Salesforce didn't notice. So nobody knew this was going on until you put a reverse proxy into place. And all of a sudden, there was an opportunity to capture those malicious requests and access into this environment, into this SaaS environment.
And part of the
Yeah.
problem here is that Snowflake not didn't have a way for you to enforce on their Snowflake tenant that people had to use
Oh,
MFA.
really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was one of the big problems. So the MSP, like you would have to have like manual enforcement or checking with them and auditing to make sure they were using 2FA, which is a big problem. Um, and
Or
it
SSO,
is
right? Some other component that enforces it for you, right?
That's exactly what I was going to get. How prevalent
Oh,
it
sorry.
still is, right? To have SSO or even MFA taxes that people are going to charge extra, like a lot
Mm-hmm.
more, sometimes more than double the price for a SaaS product, if they're going to allow you to do SSO. Because the thing that would have solved a lot of those problems, especially the unknown BYOD programs, would be integrate with an SSO provider that's going to not only enforce the use of 2FA, but also enforce that you are logging in from an approved device. You have some sort of endpoint verification step as well in the authentication flow, right? Where if you're using a personal machine, you're not allowed, even if you do know the login password and 2FA. If you want to use your home computer, you can't because there's an additional thing that needs to be. I mean, every control is uh, can be bypassed if you're dedicated and smart enough. But like for most people, right? The person just doing that because it's easier, because it's more convenient, they're not going to do it, right? And so that's the thing that's so aggravating to me. And you call it out on the report, right? The fact that the vendors need to take responsibility for this, and and I really hope I don't see nearly enough pressure on vendors to stop charging the SSO and MFA tax as I think they should be. Right. And by the way, we're leading by example here at Tenchi. We provide like full MFA. We enforce MFA for every user. It's not even an option per tenant. You don't have an option to log into our product without MFA or SSO, and we don't charge for any of it. We don't charge extra for any of it, I should say. Anyway,
Oh, I
back
was
to the
about to sign
report.
up. Free. I want it.
Too much
It's,
friction. I don't want it.
I mean, it
I want
helps,
to just get
right?
right in there, get to work.
Oh,
Our
yeah,
customer base is security professionals, right? So that helps. I
exactly.
think people are
Yeah,
going
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be less angry with the friction, but still,
yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
I
This is
just want to
this is
be
a point I
hanging
make
on
as well.
the roof rack of the car of IT as it speeds down the highway.
Yeah. But this is a point I make as well, right? Oh, it's more friction. Well, some people want friction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially how much access you have to something, right? And that's kind of like again, all the controls you described are wonderful. Everybody should do them, but they're incredibly hard to deploy, especially at scale, right?
Yeah.
So, as a kind of a, happy medium, we try to just lay it out. Look, you have to understand how valuable those credentials are to you. What is the access
Yeah.
associated with each of them? And you have to, respond. Your environment has to respond accordingly, right? If any of those credentials can leak, right, or they will leak for while you're trying to figure all of this out in your environment, right? Okay, what is the actual, how much pain it is for a normal user to have their account stolen, for an employee, for an administrator,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you just try to tighten it
And
up
there
as you can.
there's some legitimate trade-offs that you can make there. Like if you look at banking, that doesn't require MFA. The trade-off there is they try to be better at detecting misuse, right? So if you want to reduce that friction, you can, but you better be really good at detecting, when that behavior changes and all of a sudden someone's sucking down the entire data instance and be able to contain it very quickly. So like that's an option, but I think that's almost harder than just enabling MFA.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Or why not both?
Brazil has had MFA in banking for like 20, 25 years now. So
Our ATMs are
Yeah,
biometrics,
we're
and
we're in the Stone Ages here.
you you can't claim that the average Brazilian person, like if you look at our illiteracy rates here, you know what I'm saying? That they anyway. You can find a way to deal with the friction, right? I think the economic incentives is part of the problem. We talking about economic incentives. I just wanted to point out something that also spoke to me when I saw that 30% of breaches had third-party involvement, Alex. The thing that came to mind was that, and you actually referenced those in the footnotes of the report. A lot of studies have been coming out from cyber insurance companies, and you mentioned coalition and resilience. I think cowbell. We covered all of those, right, Adrian, on the recent issues of the podcast. I think cowbell was the last one
Yeah.
to come out. Um, and you see them all hovering, like the claims associated with third party breaches is around 40%. And I think so first of all, the numbers are close, like 30, 40%. They're kind of in the vicinity. There's a margin of error there. And I think that the difference being cyber insurance will cover incidents that cause damage, not only breaches. And your number is restricted to breaches, which is a subset of incidents, right? So I feel like everyone is kind of agreeing here that this number around 30 and 40% of incidents or breaches that are related to third parties. And the thing I keep telling people, and I really love that you found that out independently and is giving it this emphasis on the report, is that third party cyber risk management is not a minor problem that you assign a couple of people to and forget. Like, this is material, this is important. This is like a hefty percentage of the losses you're incurring due to cybersecurity incidents, right? As a big company, assuming that's where our listeners live, right? People in enterprise security. Um, so it's yet another reminder, backed by a lot of data, right, from the cyber insurance companies, now from the DBIR, which is, I mean, I feel
Yeah,
no fear of making a mistake here. Probably one of the most respected sources as far as data backed conclusions about the cybersecurity industry, right, and incidents.
I
Go
mean,
ahead.
it's a sobering thought that you can do everything right. You can have the most advanced security program on the planet, and if you partner with the wrong third party, none of that matters.
is it sobering? Makes me want to drink. I don't quite understand your. Maybe it's an
Briefly
idiom.
sobering, then we drink.
I think who was it that had a slide that I found so interesting about risk classification? Was it Dave Lewis? I think it was Dave Lewis, uh, that said, like, what is your risk acceptance level? And then like the CEO says like reputational, the CFO says something else, the CISO says whiskey. So that's the conclusion. In any case, you also got a figure here in the report that caught my attention, that there was an increase in the amount of ransomware, right? So two things about it. So the slight increase from 32%, well, not that slight of increase, 32% to 44% of incidents involving ransomware, if I understand the numbers correctly. Um, and I was wondering if you had data about if this was direct or indirect ransomware. I'm using a term I just learned, I think, on the Cowbell report, where they categorize indirect ransomware, where like you're being indirectly
If your third party
impacted
gets ransomed.
by a third party
Hmm.
ransomware, either because it spreads into your environment via a third party, or because you suffer an availability. Because, for example,
Mhm.
your
Right.
contact center or your BPO provider is offline. So part of your business is offline because they are
Mhm.
offline. If you have or you're planning on adding that. And the other thing that caught my attention is that, of course, smaller organizations, right, are being disproportionately impacted. If you have any also any measure of how many of those small organizations ended up creating impacts for some of their B2B customers?
So to answer your first question, we are not considering the availability cases there, right? These are like, honest to God ransomware attacks. So in this specific case that you mentioned, oh, it was at a partner and it spread to your environment. Yes, those would definitely count, right? But unless your environment was like there was
Ransomware.
malware in it, right? No. Those other things would go into our um, interruption number under availability, right? And I don't think we have a good coverage of those. This is something that I've been trying to. You're not going to get those from instant response companies, right? You're going to get our best source for those so far have been insurance, cyber insurance, and we have been talking to them about, oh, we want to know about those too. I know they're not quote unquote first level cyber for you, but they matter a lot for the kind of the work that we're trying to do. So I have less to talk about this than I would like. It's definitely something we're going to be spending a lot of time researching. The the I don't think there's a lot I can tell you about the small companies, apart from the fact that they're small, right? From as a part of your second question, right? A lot of
Mhm.
anonymity going on, even though for the ransomware data sets, we have way less. Let me put it a different way. For the ransomware data set, we have a lot more public data than otherwise because of all the actor disclosure activity, right? But we didn't quite have do that work that you're mentioning. Oh, how do you branch out this specific victim to whatever constituency they serve, right? We definitely, I mean, we talk about this in the report, like I mentioned before. We do bring up the kind of the big guys, like Change, like CDK, like Blue Yonder, right? These made significant amount of headlines, right? But more as a example or kind of an anecdote to again support the data or at the very least support the research direction that we chose on a lot of different things that we did.
Super interesting. Super interesting.
Can I bring up
Um,
something that's particularly depressing to me?
Sure.
Um,
Only
so
one?
well, one in particular that
it's
kept
all been
showing
so
up.
cheerful so far, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, what's the purpose? Like it is what it is. But the speed of remediation, is something that I just repeatedly found. Just like how could it take so long to change out creds? How could it take so long to
Yeah.
patch like not just vulnerabilities, but vulnerabilities on edge devices where you have management interfaces exposed to the public internet? It's just, and it's something, again, I do a lot of advisory calls with a lot of enterprises, and the vast majority of folks are not agile. They don't have DevOps programs. They have ancient sonic walls that they forgot about sitting at retail locations with that management port exposed to the public internet. So
What can I
Yeah.
say?
I don't know if
Look,
there's a question in there.
look, let me give you a different perspective, right? One of the things that we
Give
were
me anything.
specifically looking for, and we found it was, hey, at least people are very aware and cognizant that they should be doing those first.
Okay.
Because if you look at our like fully remediated numbers, they were the highest across the board, even against the full CISA right? And also the median there was smaller than the full CISA calf, so there's a definitely being done first, right? So people got their priorities straight. It's just a lot of work, right? It's just, it's not a the lyrical choices I had on that specific segment, right? They were on purpose. Right. You are pushing a boulder up a hill
Yeah.
constantly.
And it's, that just looking at that particular graph on page 30 here, the remediated percentage is the highest for edge CISA KEVs only. So just edge devices that are on CISA KEV. But also the unremediated is also the highest. It's 30%. And then it's the middle one, the partially remediated, that's a little bit lower there. I wonder if a lot of that unremediated, so a lot of the conversations I have is about asset management, visibility, attack surface management. I kind of jokingly was talking about the sonic walls you don't even know are there, but I wonder if that's a big chunk of this 30%. They just didn't even realize they had it.
It could be, right? The one thing that I think it's explains it more readily, it's easier as a kind of more Occam's razor kind of thing, is that there is there is no partially remediated here because everybody has come on, you have a couple of firewalls, right? You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's like the one you use and the load balancer one, right? So if you're talking about, I need to patch my Windows machines, partially remediated makes a lot of sense and is a nightmare, right? But you either patched your file or you didn't because you only have a handful of those. So it's more about, um, again, what you're saying could also have a point in it, right? There's like cutting room for floor research, something that didn't quite make the report that I want to write a blog post about, where we were working on with kind of the internet scanning perspective and
Mm.
how these things moved across the months, right? Specifically for those same vulnerabilities, right? And
Yeah.
you never quite get rid of them ever. There's always the trailing, um, you know, background radiation of, okay, these guys are toxic and nobody
Mm.
ever patches them, right? And that has been ever since the beginning of time. Ever since men have started scanning the internet, they have found that, there's a lot of things that are very poorly maintained everywhere.
And I kind of understand people dealing with like legacy appliances on traditional on-prem infrastructure. It's just harder, right? Because not everyone has high availability. Patching those things can cause downtime. You're going to need a window
Mhm.
of availability. You might need to go through a change approval board in order to get those things approved. So those people, you can visualize those being not very agile, but at the same time, you have an entire page there on the report talking about credentials, and you see
Yeah.
that the majority of what you're talking about are API keys. And you have like a deep dive on things that you found on Git repositories. Again, you're talking about developers. Those folks should be more agile. Those things should be more automatable, right? You could have
Yeah.
automated checking, and actually you do. Like, for example, GitHub has done a lot of work for years now in trying to detect exposed credentials themselves, notify repo owners. And not only that, like if they find AWS credentials exposed in a GitHub repo, they will tell AWS, and AWS will take action on those credentials, right? Still, you found that the median time to remediate leaks leakage discovered on GitHub, on a GitHub repo, is 94 days. After the vendor did
Yeah.
everything they could, they're screaming at you, "Hey, there's a credential here, rotate it." They're telling the system that cred gives access to have them mitigate, and still people
Mhm.
are not rotating them like on a public repo. Like I can't even, right? That brings the point of, and it's not just that. You have a lot of interesting stats here. Like half of all the development in CI/CD secrets belong to GitLab, probably because, and maybe I'm being unfair here, they haven't done that same level of work that GitHub does,
Mm.
right? And so their percentage has diminished, but the time is still up to people to rotate the credential, right, and actually remove them from the repo. GitHub doesn't go that far, right? 66% are JSON Web Tokens. So we're talking about credentials, API keys, that sort of thing. 43% of cloud infrastructure secrets are Google Cloud API keys, which is really surprising. They're third in market share. So that tells me again, maybe Azure and the AWS are doing something
Yeah,
right
but
here.
people don't know how to use them though, so they're just laying there.
It's going to get so much worse with MCP servers and agentic AI, and there's going to be so many more credentials
Stop.
just
This is an
all over
AI
the
free
place.
zone, Adrian. Please stop.
Sorry,
You have an entire section on AI. Come on, you
not
have
for
to,
long.
Alex, on the report, I mean. But the thing I wanted to talk about here is you see a lot of talk about the software supply chain, folks, around S bombs and checking the binaries, and you have all sorts of solutions looking at that, like what are the dependencies, etc. And
SCA, yeah,
so not just SCA, but like the things have evolved from that.
Dependabot. Hmm.
Yeah, but a lot of people forget that in those scenarios, the security of the development infrastructure and the CI/CD infrastructure of the vendor that develops the software you're using is as critical or even more critical, right? Until someone, solves the halting problem, right, which is mathematically impossible. Analyzing binaries to try to determine whether they're malicious or not is, the best effort. It's not going to provably work. But at the same time, let's look at what happened with SolarWinds. A lot of people sold a lot of SCA tooling and a lot of SBOM tooling related to SolarWinds, but it was a problem where the Russians allegedly hacked the CI/CD infrastructure of the software vendor and led the binaries to be tainted when they were generated, not because they imported a library with a known CVE, but because like actual malicious code was inserted. Recently, we saw
Mhm.
something similar with the TJ Actions changed file GitHub action, where someone compromised the credentials of a developer.
Yeah,
And again, we're buying
a
software.
trusted update.
We're buying software. How deeply are we looking into the IAM practices, the CI/CD security, the endpoint security of the vendors that write that software when they download their code? How do you know that that code hasn't been tampered with? Right? Again, ample precedent of that happening. I completely agree on checking the binaries or checking the software dependencies. Absolutely, that's one step. But I'm seeing very little discussion on that, frankly. And I think it's just because people gave up. Oh, it's too hard, or the vendors are too large, they'll never allow me to do anything or something. But I think we need to, again, apply more pressure. We need to apply more pressure, especially in an age where there's no software liability, right? We talked about
Yeah,
CrowdStrike. What liability do they have? Like they cost a single airline $500 million in losses allegedly due to downtime because of a faulty update. And still, like you see lawyers, I'm not a lawyer, discussing this, and the airline's going to have a really hard time proving that they have to cover any of that loss because everyone signs contracts that says as is, no warranty for suitability or anything else. Anyway, pet peeve.
yeah, I look, speaking strictly as an individual with absolutely nothing, that to do with the company I work for. I I just think that Delta messed up because when they filed the lawsuit, they put Microsoft as a co-defendant, right? Microsoft lawyers have bought their four yachts for 40 years out of shutting down software liability. If they had only sued CrowdStrike, they might have a shot. But the fact they named Microsoft was a rookie mistake. But on topic, the the I think it's a big problem, and I don't have any answers for you on why don't we see more of it, or why isn't more of it publicized, right? I don't believe there is good infrastructure in the very general definition of infrastructure to capturing those sorts of problems, right? You only get to hear one of those when it's like, oh, the world is ending, like apocalyptic level stuff, like SolarWinds, right? And so there's really, there's not a lot of data on, what's the best stance, what's the best, right? But I generally want to believe that people are trying, right? Or at least some people are trying to convince they should be trying, if that makes sense, budget-wise, on doing a better job there.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes like I think some of these are too big to tackle. Because even if you convince like 2% of vendors out there could be a big help, but even getting to like 2% might be a challenge. With SolarWinds, the lesson I took away from that is one that Zero Trust is tackling. Like, don't let SolarWinds talk to anybody other than SolarWinds. I mean, maybe the bad guys still have control of those systems that they talk to, but certainly your
Mhm.
server shouldn't be able to go to totallytrustme.ru, some
Mhm.
random website on
Yeah,
the internet. So people with really good outbound filtering got off okay in SolarWinds and Log4Shell and a lot of these events. Like, sure, the exploit succeeded or the bad software got in, but if you can't get back out, you've got less to worry about.
yeah, this was actually a point we made back then, where, oh my God, the world is ending. How do I prevent myself? Actually, you should already be doing this. This is just egress,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And if you were doing like the thing that everybody tells you to do everywhere, you would have been fine. If you are SolarWinds, though, boy, you're in trouble. There's a lot of work here to be done. So if you're building software and selling software, yeah, again, using again the barn door stuff, it has been blown wide open, and it becomes more clear that this is a not only a viable avenue, a vector, but also one that really pays out. So
I think
anyway.
SolarWinds may be a bad example of egress as a good control, because one of the things that SolarWinds is made to do is to monitor and admin like network infrastructure. So someone that has installed the malicious version of SolarWinds and has like admin credentials to log into and monitor routers and firewalls might be able to circumvent that. Like the Russians didn't need that to do what they wanted to do because it was intelligence gathering, but someone that wanted to do ransomware, for example, probably couldn't bypass. But again, creates additional barriers, right?
Yeah, no,
It
they needed to talk to, they specifically needed to talk to the C2, right? And if you had like, oh, restricting the communications from the server to the things they need to monitor, you would have been in a fairly good spot, hopefully, right? But yeah, your point stands with something that doesn't need to ask for permission. Let's just deploy ransomware everywhere and see what it gets us.
right. Um, the final thing I wanted to say, because I think we're a little bit over on time here, is it's not a question, it's more like a comment. That you love those, Alex, when you're doing talks? Uh, is like I just wanted to repeat something that really resonated with me on the report, where you have an entire page where you're providing like guidance on, since you talked a lot about the nature of the problem and the size of the problem, but from a very data-driven perspective, there's kind of a page there where I recommend everyone read, where you're talking about those three categories of third parties, like the custodial scenario, the shared access scenario, blah blah blah. And the sentence that really stuck to me was, we can only effectively achieve a reasonable level of security in this heavily connected world through effective collaboration. Like holding vendors accountable is certainly a part of the equation. It's only through collaboration and transparency and increased information sharing that will move the needle forward. And I just want to say, I want to scream those sentences from the rooftop, because that's not what 99% of TPCRM is about. Like, people working in TPCRM are good people. They're trying to do sometimes horribly manual work, completely overworked because you have a company with a couple of TPCRM analysts and 7,000, 10,000 vendors, and it's impossible. Um, but a lot of what we're doing, if we're honest, in this industry is we're trying to audit vendors. We're trying to say, hey, I'm gonna try to find reasons to say no. Say I cannot work with you. You're too small. You're too risky a vendor, and we can't do business with you unless your score improves or you fix those things, etc. That's not collaboration. That's not transparency. That's not win-win. That's like me auditing you, and it creates a barrier to true collaboration, to true communication. And we've always been, and we try really hard, right, Adrian, here in the podcast, to be fair to both first and third parties, and recognize where the shared responsibility lies, etc. But the thing that I feel will really change this industry is if we go more towards like the Toyota model, where Toyota is a company that invests in their supply chain. They have like a huge budget to help the companies they depend on to do business, to build the cars that they sell, improve their logistics, their quality. Like they work together, they're co-manufacturing. And we don't see as much of that in the security industry when we talk to vendors or other kinds of third parties, right? Mm. And the other thing that you emphasize, which I find super interesting, is the fact that a lot of tools have been implementing internal control testing. We see this, even though there's a lot that we talked about today that can be detected using external attack surface monitoring, um, a lot of it can't. We talked about endpoint security, we talked about CI/CD pipeline security, we talked about IAM and abused credentials. There's nothing around those security disciplines that you can learn just looking at someone's external attack surface. So that's also something that I feel you can only achieve through collaboration because you can't check that on a vendor without them letting you in and giving you data. And it's going to make a huge difference because it's the largest part of the problem, right? If you sum up all of those other security disciplines, mm, and I feel even though that might not have been your objective, you painted a beautiful data-driven picture to show that, to reinforce that, because you can add up the numbers and see the percentages and realize, yeah, like this is where the problem lies. We talked about Snowflake, we talked about all those real examples, and that's where the problems are coming from. So this is a long, long thank you, because I feel not enough people are talking about this in these terms, right? And we definitely need this as an industry, in my humble opinion.
You're
Anyway.
welcome. No, I mean, there's nothing really to add here, right? The big scale, right? You have to automate as much as you can, and this is especially an area where, especially if we're seeing growth here, right? You know, how can we be more efficient? How can we be more effective? Also, always becomes a question, right? That people should be asking themselves. And so, again, like I said, I'm gonna have a hard time following up the third-party edition of the DBIR because is it always gonna be third party? I can't make another third-party edition. I have to find something else to talk about. You know what I mean? Right? Is it always gonna be the biggest thing third party? Maybe it will,
Well,
right?
I mean, look at RSA. It's on the third edition of the AI edition, so it's
Well, you
it's
did
hard to
find
get
a
out of
way.
some of these ruts. Yeah.
You did find a way to sneak it in there. Congratulations.
Yeah. Sorry. But
Right. So if the data keeps telling you that's the thing to talk about, you're probably going to talk about that. But anyway, it's time for Adrian to
That's
wrap up.
true.
yeah,
Sorry.
and I mean, if you're building a software product, the roadmap gives you permission to, kick the can down the road, right? Like I remember, I'm an old video gamer, and I remember when the video game was done, you burned it onto a chip, it went in a cartridge, and you shipped it to a store, right? Like there was no day one patch, there was no opportunity for that, there was no internet. So I feel like that's kind of enabled this. Like we can do the security features later if people ask for them, or if people
Mhm.
demand them. Anything can be justified as a roadmap item, right? Oh, Q4, we'll get to that. I know we
Five.
said that Q4 last year, but really, for real this
Let's
time.
do
Didn't say
five.
which Q4.
Q6.
All right, and that's all we've got time for with this special. We went a little bit long. I think it was deserved, and you should definitely check out the report. This should be coming out after the report comes out, so you can. Is there an easy URL, Alex?
Yes, Verizon.com/DBIR. Doesn't get any easier than that.
Very nice. All right, go there, check out the report. Mr. Pinto will be on approximately 37 different webcasts and podcasts in addition to this one talking about this. So good luck on your world tour, and we'll all see each other in RSA as well.
That's true. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. This was lots of fun. And yeah, it's launch week is always a lot. But I'm glad to be able to share a little bit of it's been noodling around my brain for a year, right, with the world. So
It must be
always
very
happy.
satisfying.
It is actually. It is very good. It's great. I mean, look, it's always wonderful to get everybody's feedback, to get everybody's thoughts, right? And honestly, um, way more of the report is shaped by those interactions than people realize, right? Every
Oh
time I'm
yeah.
talking, every time I am discussing a point with a specific expert in a situation very much like this one, and they'll say, "Oh, what about this?" And I'm like, that's
Mm.
interesting. Maybe I should try to make that happen next year. And because again, I think as our analysis evolves, the discourse evolves, right? The things we can do, we're always trying to build on what we already have, right? To try to give again a more complete picture and more, better understanding of what we're up against at any point in time to again allows us to make better decisions. Sometimes we can only choose a handful of things to focus on at any given time, right? If we can make that decision process a little bit easier for a CISO, for someone who's in charge of security, we did our job. That's all we can hope for, right? And hey, if we make them have fun in the way, I guess that's already a
Yeah.
plus. That's also a plus.
It is a fun read. All right. If you liked what you heard and you're on a platform where you can like, subscribe, or leave a comment, please do so. We'd love to get your feedback. Stay safe and stay vigilant, and we'll see you again next month for the May episode.